Alrighty, what's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Time Out with Doc and Caveman. You are here with Dr. Fantasy, and as always, my co-host, the Fantasy Caveman. We are continuing to roll on with our NBA team previews for the 2021-22 season. Before we get rolling here, make sure you subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. You'll get a notification anytime we post any great NBA content, and we have tons to do before the season begins. So today we are discussing the Sacramento Kings. In 2020, they were 31-41 under Luke Walton, 12th in the Western Conference. A few stats from last year: 11th in offensive rating, so they were very good offensively. However, 30th defensively. So we are talking the worst rated defensive team in the league today. They did give up the sixth worst three-point percentage. They did struggle particularly defending on the perimeter. So that'll be something to monitor in the future. And then just the other side note, they did win the Summer League just recently. So this is the Summer League champions we're talking about here. Going back to last season, some of their leaders, Darren Fox took another step forward at 25.2 points. Buddy Hield at 16.6 points, and then Harrison Barnes at 16.1 points. Rebounds, you had Rashawn Holmes at 8.3, Marvin Bagley at 7.4. Assists, De'Aaron Fox 7.2, Tyrus Halliburton at 5.3. And then steals, DeLon Wright at 1.6, De'Aaron Fox 1.5, Halliburton at 1.3. And then finishing it off, Rashawn Holmes with 1.6 blocks per game. So, few names to talk about here, but who stood out to you, Caveman?
I think you know where I'm going with this.
No idea.
No idea? Okay, well, obviously the name for me is Halliburton. You know he was one of my boys going into last year's draft, and not just because he was from this area, my home state. That's not why.
Yes, it is.
But he really, and this is like, I don't think Luke Walton did a bad job last year at all. But I do have a problem, as Halliburton started, he came out on fire at the gate, and I don't think that he gave him and Fox enough run together. They didn't really play a lot together last season, which is why I was like, that's the one big criticism I have of Luke Walton. But like you said, he averaged 13 points, 5 assists, 3 rebounds, almost a steal and a half. Shot 40% from 3. I think he really, and I hope the guy, if Luke Walton knows what's good for him, he's starting Tyrus Halliburton this year. I don't know what else. I know he thrived in the sixth man type role for him. And we remember talking about going in the last. Tyrese Halliburton was one of the steals of the draft last year. Mm-hmm. He slid way too far, and I think that put a bit of a chip on his shoulder. And I think he delivered. So I really hope this year he gets put in that starting lineup. Because I don't see what else he could have done last year otherwise. But I just think him, to me, he had the most impressive. I know De'Aaron Fox, but he continued to show growth. But Halliburton, to me, easily the biggest surprise off the team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it was surprising to me that Halliburton was so good so quickly. I think that's a surprise. I don't know if it's surprising that he was good, but he seemed just very refined for being a rookie. To me, I do think De'Aaron Fox, you at least have to talk about a little bit, because from what I saw last season, I thought this was a guy that was a star, but I legitimately think he could be a superstar. And I'm not saying he's there, but he's improved every single season. And if he takes another step forward this year, I mean, he's borderline superstar then. I think he's starting to get to that conversation with him. He's still only 23 years old, so he's still right in the prime of his development. So I think, yeah, he's going to be interesting to monitor what he does. I don't think that Halliburton's going to start. The reason that I say that is because they still need to get rid of Buddy Hield. And you mentioned this before,
Forget
and I
Buddy.
think it's worth. I mean, I think he's better than Buddy Hield, but the thing is, Buddy Hield's not going to be a part of the long-term plan. I'm not the only one that would say I'm shocked he's still with the Kings right now, but they still want to get maximum value for him. And you've talked about this. I forget who we were talking about, and I was like, it's a good point, honestly. D'Angelo Russell, that's who it was. I think that the Kings need to showcase Hield a little more and get him. You don't want to put him on the bench and then he's what is he worth at that point? I think you need to continue to raise his value. I'd be shocked if he finished the season with the team, but I also would have been shocked if he was still here by the end of the offseason. So who knows what happens with Buddy Hield, but long term it's going to be Halliburton and Darren Fox either way. It's just a matter of when, not if. So, I think it'll be fun to watch that backcourt. Halliburton's very long, and I think defensively he'll be able to make up for some of De'Aaron Fox's woes. So I do like that backcourt pairing quite a bit, but I think it'll be interesting. I mean, they could play all three of them theoretically because not De'Aaron Fox, Halliburton is long enough. They have Harrison Barnes, who's a good 3-and-D guy, but I mean, realistically, I don't think there's any reason you couldn't start all three of them. Do I think it's going to happen? No. Luke Walton seemed to have his guys kind of last season. Buddy Hield started every single game that he was active for. So I don't see. He only didn't play in one game last season, and every 71 starts Buddy Hield had last year. So I'd be surprised if Buddy Hield didn't start. But yeah, I agree with you. Is it the best decision for him? Probably not, but we'll see how that turns out. Another guy I didn't even mention the guy I really wanted to talk about, which was Rashawn Holmes. He got paid this offseason, deservedly so. He's kind of my guy. I like the way that he plays. He reminds me a lot of just I don't want to say Jay Crowder because they're different players. Holmes is more of a big man, but just that energy that Rashawn Holmes brings, I think he has a championship attitude where he was very athletic. He ran the floor very well for him last year, and they were a very high-paced, high-energy team. And I liked what I saw from him. So I think that he's going to be a part of this future as a high-energy player. Wasn't always consistent defensively, even though he averaged 1.6 blocks, and he was okay defensively, but I'd like to see him improve there, especially for a high-energy guy. But I think he's at least worth mentioning. 14 points, 8 rebounds, showed some improvement last season. I'm interested to see where he fits into the long-term picture as well. So let's go over what they've done so far this offseason. In the draft, they took one of my other boys, Davion Mitchell, 9th overall, which I'm sure we'll get to. And then in the second round, they took Nehemias Queta, 39th overall. Probably not a name you're going to see anytime soon. They added Tristan Thompson via trade, re-signed Mo Harkless, re-signed Terence Davis, and extended Rashawn Holmes. So really the only addition there, Tristan Thompson. And then they lost DeLon Wright, and that was basically it for their off season. So any comments here, K-Man? Not much going on here.
You missed. They did bring in Alex Len as well.
Oh, Alex Len too. Yep, I was going to talk about him on the depth chart. Yeah.
And they did finally give up on Hassan Whiteside, who was with them last season. Hassan Whiteside is one of the most puzzling stories in the league. But we can talk about him when we talk about his new team in Utah. But I mean, and this is the big thing is the pick of Davion Mitchell. I think the Kings were thrown for a loop because they really expected Wagner to be there for him, and he wasn't. So I think the Mets threw everybody off when they picked him. If we're being honest, everybody expected Wagner to go to Sacramento. So I think that kind of threw him off. So they kind of changed course a little bit. I do think. Long term, I kind of love a Fox, Mitchell, and then Halliburton because he's long enough to play the 3. I think a Fox, Mitchell, Halliburton starting trio. When Buddy Hield moves on or they get rid of Buddy Hield, and then Harrison Barnes as well is not going to be around forever. once they get rid of them. So I think that you mentioned, I think Davion Mitchell makes up for a lot of defensive efficiencies in Darren Fox's game. So I do think that that's a great, kind of compliment. They kind of complement each other quite well in that regard. So, yeah, the other name, like I said, the other draft name, it's not kind of irrelevant. It's not even going to be on the opening roster. So, yeah, I think Davion Mitchell was their big offseason thing, their big draft pick. But other than that, they kind of, that's pretty much it. They didn't, other than that pick, there wasn't really anything that's gonna move the needle in any direction. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I mentioned when we started this episode that they struggled to defend on the perimeter, and I think that with Halliburton and Davion Mitchell, that solves a huge issue for them defensively. And I think that's going to be critical to watch this season. Davion Mitchell led a championship roster last year at Baylor. He was a defensive player of the year in all of college basketball. This is a legitimate top tier defender that they're getting from day one. He's going to come off the bench in the beginning of the season, but when the dust settles and you see Davion Mitchell, Halliburton, and Darren Fox getting their consistent minutes together, and they're going to rotate around, I think it's a really nice pairing overall because Darren Fox has offensive superstar potential. He's once again one of those guys that frustrates me a little bit with his defensive effort, although he does collect some steals every once in a while, but that doesn't make him a good defender. But
we know your stance that guy just because they get steals doesn't make them a good defender.
I will always stand by that because it's fact, but Davion Mitchell and Halliburton can 100% make up for that. So as long as De'Aaron Fox can show 5% commitment to being a below average team defender, I think that there's enough here to make up for what he lacks. So especially, like I said, Halliburton, when you gotta have a guy that's that long that can defend some fours realistically, I'm not gonna say bigger fives, but a lot of fours in today's game he could guard. So it definitely gives him a little flexibility. We started talking about the depth chart quite a bit already, so I guess I'll just go over it. As of right now, we mentioned in the backcourt, Fox, Buddy Hield is listed as their starter. We'll see where the minutes shake out with Halliburton and him. Davion Mitchell coming off the bench. And then Terence Davis as well, who I mentioned they re-signed. Not a huge name, but he was actually fairly effective last year coming off the bench. Averaged 9 points for him. Proved to be a pretty solid 3-point shooter for him. So he'll definitely play some minutes coming off the bench. At the 3, they have Harrison Barnes and Mo Harkless. Terence Davis will mix in there as well. Then at the 4, Marvin Bagley, who we haven't mentioned once, but Marvin Bagley is still there. And then Rashawn Holmes listed at the 5. Behind those two, you have Metu, Tristan Thompson, and Alex Len. I think the 5. I think it's kind of interesting. They have decent depth there. Alex Len's played a lot of valuable minutes. Tristan Thompson is a great veteran presence there. Can bring energy off of that bench as well. So I think it's an interesting collection they have, especially off the bench, because I think they kind of diagnosed, obviously, that they struggled defensively last year. And I think bringing guys like Len, Thompson, Davion Mitchell can really help them make up for some of their weaknesses last season. What do you think?
Yeah, I look at this roster and I like it. I really think with this roster and the way it's constructed right now, I just think it's a matter of, now they have the team assembled. Now it's the matter of, them growing together and getting that cohesion. And yeah, I like their long term. I like Rashawn Holmes. I don't think I still believe Marvin Bagley can be good. Yet not really panned out to this point, but with this Kings team, if Marvin Bagley can become something or live up to the hype he was supposed to, then that's just another piece that they have now. Yeah, we know Harrison Barnes is gonna be around together, but for now, I like Harrison Barnes on this team right now. Another guy that I think could have a solid impact. You didn't mention Shahimus Ramsay is there as well. I think
he was one of my boys. I love Jameis.
And you didn't mention him. I didn't hear you
I
mention
didn't.
him.
Yeah.
How
I don't know if
are
he's
you
going to get a
upset?
lot of minutes.
I mean, he's
No,
gonna.
because I was
he's
trying
gonna.
not to be biased.
I mean, yeah, he's gonna. I think he could be a potential key depth piece for them. I mean, I like this. This team has good depth all the way around, in my opinion. I just think now it's just. I think this is the team for the most part. Stick with this team that they have. Let them grow together. And I really think this is a team that has potential. They address the defensive concerns. They have offense too. Buddy Hield's say what you want about Buddy Hield, but Buddy Hield can light it up. We know Halliburton can score. Darren Fox can score. They have a good mix of offense and defense. I just think this team is young yet, and I really think it's a matter of growing and gelling together. I think that's what it is at this point.
Yeah, and it makes me happy you brought up Jameis Ramsey. I think it's just going to be hard. He only averaged 7 minutes last year. I think it's hard until once they move on from Buddy Hield, I can see him moving into the rotation a little more consistently. He was up and down from the G League last year. He actually had a really good summer league, so I think he's going to make the roster from the get-go this year. So I'm excited for that because anytime one of your boys looks like he's going to make, have a better season than he did the year before, it's a good year. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I think this is one of those teams, though, you have to see one of these secondary pieces. When we talk about the best teams in the league, they have at least 2 all-star level players. Darren Fox, surprisingly, was a snub to me last year, has not made an all-star team yet.
I would 100% expect him to make an all-star team this year.
I would as well. I think that's going to change this year. But they need one of these other guys to step up and be that second all-star. And I think it's just a matter of who. Is it going to be Halliburton that proves he can do it? Is it Davion Mitchell? Bagley I've been disappointed with Bagley because he's been good, but they don't give him the playing time. He hasn't averaged above 25 minutes yet in his career. He started a lot more last season, but he's still only 22 years old, so, not giving up on him yet.
Definitely take the next step, too.
Rashawn Holmes, but you got to see one of these guys step up to take that next step to be their second all-star. Yeah, and if they do that, then you're talking a team that, okay, they can legitimately compete and make the playoffs and be a fun team to watch. But that transitions into where we end, where we see them finishing. I mean, this is a team, they finished 12th last season in the Western Conference. They were I want to say they're not going to make the playoffs, but if we're being honest about it, they are only 2 games out last year. And if they even make marginal improvements defensively, if they're 22nd, 25th instead of last in the league, I think this is a team that can be a borderline playoff team and compete, if we're being honest about it. Now, if I was going to take a team out of the playoff race, I think that's where it gets a little dicey for me, because when I'm looking at the top 10 teams in the West, I'm not sure I would remove any of them from the playoff picture, but I think it's being naive to say the King. Every prediction I see says, the Kings aren't going to do it this year, but based on what they should be defensively this year, I think they have a chance to be that 9th or 10th seed in the West and at least compete for it.
Yeah, and we all and the Thunder have ruined everything for me, because nobody ever expected the Thunder to do what they did. They ended up as the 5th seed in the Western Conference. So, and this Kings team has way more talent than that Thunder team did. So it would not shock me one bit to see them in the playoffs. I just think it's a matter of, I don't think they're there yet to really. I think next year, this team is 100% going to make the playoffs. They're going to at least get in the top 10. 100%. I don't think it's this year yet. I just don't think they're quite there. I think you need to see. I think Luke Walton needs to make these necessary adjustments. We didn't talk. Luke Walton's a bit on the hot seat this year.
Mm-hmm.
If he doesn't, I'm not saying he has to make the playoffs, but especially defensively, if they're still a bottom 3 team again in defense, Luke Walton's gone. He needs to get his team to improve on the defensive end, and they addressed it. So he doesn't have an excuse. He was given pieces that should be able to make them a better defensive team. And if he's not able to do it, Luke Walton's probably gone. So, yeah, I just don't. I expect them to grow this year. I just don't just don't think it's going to be enough. And like you said, looking at the teams that made the playoffs last year, I'm not confident enough to take any of them out to put the Kings in. But it wouldn't shock me if they somehow, by the smallest of margins, were able to sneak into the 10 seed. But I just don't think it's their time yet. I think they're 1 year away from really making the playoffs.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Luke Walton has now coached 5 seasons in the league, and he's never had a winning record. If you read a lot of his coaching scouting report, quote unquote, a lot of it is he's really good at developing young talent. But I think at some point you have to see, does he have the ability to not just develop that talent, but to win with that talent? And I think that question is going to be answered potentially this year.
I don't think they don't have to make the playoffs for him to keep his job, but they can't be last in the league defensively again. He's gone.
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. I think they're at the point if they I think that they have not championship aspirations, but I think they have playoff aspirations. So I wouldn't be surprised even if they improved, if they didn't make the playoffs. I think they're in a period where they have to decide if Luke Walton was just their developmental coach and they're at a point where they want to win now. I think if they don't make the playoffs, he's gone, honestly. I think they're at a point where they're going to start to want to see, the fruits of their labor, so to speak. And Luke Walton, we've seen it time after time. And, people make fun of, not really make fun of, but they mentioned the Lakers when they had Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball and all those young guys that they ended up moving on from. Who was the coach developing all those players? And now all of those guys have been very successful. Luke Walton was the guy there. So Luke Walton actually has an interesting track record of working with young players that have become very successful so far in his career. And once again, we saw with Darren Fox improve a ton over the last 2 years. So he's really good at developing young players, but we'll see if he can win with them. I think that's a question. And I will say if they don't make the playoffs, I think he's gone because I think these guys are developed. He's had the time. This is his third season in Sacramento. We get it. They're developed. It's time to turn that into wins. So he definitely has a lot of pressure on him.
That's definitely I can definitely see. I wouldn't be personally. I'm not. I wasn't happy with it. And maybe this is me being a little bit biased. I wasn't really happy with the way Halliburton wasn't given enough time with Darren Fox. And also, like you mentioned with Bagley, why isn't Bagley playing more?
It's very odd.
So that Bagley's playing time better increased this year. He better be averaging more than 25 minutes a game. And we better start seeing more of Darren Fox and Halliburton together on the court. So.
Yeah, I agree because that's the future of their backcourt, and you got to see how that's going to work together. And I think it's a nice pairing, as we've mentioned a few times. So I think that's it for the Kings then. Our next episode is going to be the New Orleans Pelicans, Caveman's former team. I guess you're not on the bandwagon anymore. We'll talk about that a little bit.
It's like it was only yesterday where I said they were going to be a top 4 team in the Western Conference.
And for the record, I definitely disagreed with that. So I'm confident in that still. But
how times have changed.
But we'll talk about them next. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube wherever you listen to podcasts. That'll be a fun episode. So tune in for that one and all of our other previews coming up this offseason.